I'm Vicki Martin. I'm the chairman of the forums for the League of Women Voters in the Palatine area. And I want to personally thank all of you for being here, because when you plan anything like this, after you get everything done, then you start to worry that nobody will show up. So thank each and every one of you for coming out today. And I also want to take time to thank the Schaumburg Library. They have been fantastic to work with. We've basically occupied this entire row of rooms, and they have been fabulous hosts, and thank you to Kate. The League of Women Voters of the Palatine area includes Palatine, Barrington, Long Grove, Inverness, Hoffman Estates, Rolling Meadows, and Schaumburg. There's membership information in the back if anybody would like to join us. It's fascinating and a lot of fun, and we do good work. And when you see how slick this forum is run, you will wish that all the debates on TV would run the way we run ours. All right, we were founded in 1920 as a result of the women's suffrage movement, because all of a sudden the number of voters in the country doubled, and we had a voting population that half of them had never cast a ballot. And that was why the League of Women Voters was founded. And that was 100 years ago this month, right here in Chicago. The League's purpose is to promote responsibility through the informed and active participation of all citizens. We're nonpartisan, and we neither support, oppose, or recommend any particular candidates, although we do support certain issues. We're trying to limit the use of, or the quantity of single-use plastics. You will see our paper water bottles. Those are available at Jewel and Whole Foods. And as you can see from your program, our forum this morning features the candidates running for the Democratic nomination for the 8th Congressional District. The winner of this primary will face a Republican opponent in this fall's general election. So now I'm pleased to introduce to you our moderator for today's forum, Catherine Sawyer. Catherine is the Chief Advancement Officer at Oakton Community College. In this role, Ms. Sawyer is responsible for all of the college's externally facing functions, including marketing, social media, legislative affairs, community outreach, and the college's charitable foundation. She's a 25-year resident of the Northwest suburbs and also a member of the Palatine League of Women Voters. She's been trained by the League and has moderated many forums, so we're very fortunate that she's able to be with us today. Catherine.
Welcome, one and all. So excited that you're here to participate in the process. So as Vicki mentioned, I am a resident of the Northwest suburbs. I actually live in Palatine, which means that I am not eligible to vote in this election. And therefore, I've been asked to serve as an impartial facilitator for our discussion today. Let me take a few minutes just to explain our format and how the rules of the forum will go so that everyone is in the know. The candidates and I have had a chance to review this already, but for our audience, they are as follows. The candidates have drawn numbers to determine their speaking order. The moderator will rotate this order during the forum for questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement. Next, each candidate will have 1 minute to answer questions. The moderator will repeat the question if necessary, so candidates feel free to ask me to repeat the question if needed. Each candidate will have a maximum of 2 rebuttals. Rebuttals will be timed and limited to 30 seconds each. At the end, each candidate will have 1 minute to make a closing statement. Our league members will act as timers. They're sitting right here in the front row. You'll see them with their time paddles available. The candidates will be given 30 seconds and a 15-second warning, so please quickly wrap up your thoughts before you see the stop card. Time limits will be enforced out of respect to all candidates and to the audience. Questions will be provided by the audience, so I hope you all have question cards and are writing down your thoughts. Each question will be answered by all candidates, so audience, please ask questions that do pertain to all members of the forum. League members have index cards available for you to write them on. They will be picked up at the end of the row by volunteers. Questions will be reviewed for clarity, appropriateness, and to avoid duplication. Candidates have been asked not to interrupt one another. Candidates should speak directly to the audience. Audience, I will ask you to please turn off your electronic devices. The forum is being taped by the League of Women Voters for Education to the public. A video of today's forum will be available early next week on the League of Women Voters Palatine area website. The candidates have all agreed to this. I'd ask that you please hold your applause to the end and do not demonstrate in any way a show of support or non-support for any of our candidates. There is a space outside this room for the candidates to speak to their supporters after the forum in the hallway, and campaign literature will be available on tables in the hallway. No campaign signs may be posted. No voice or image or duplication of this forum may be used by a candidate's representative or campaign in any campaign advertising. The League of Women Voters claims copyright ownership of all recordings or transcripts produced from this event and reserves the right to publicize this forum. To view the forum, please see details printed in your program. Please be respectful to all candidates, to your moderator, and your fellow audience members. Got all that? All right, I think we're about to begin. This morning we will hear from 3 candidates hoping to represent Illinois' 8th District for the U.S. House of Representatives. With us today, in alphabetical order and on the ballot, are Inan Hussain, Raja Krishnamurthy, and William Olson. I want to thank I want to thank you all for your participation, and we will begin with your opening statements by number draw. Mr. Krishnamurthy, please begin now. Please, if you would use the microphone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, and I'm so proud to represent this district in the United States House of Representatives. When I was elected and I ran for office, I pledged to work on issues of concern to middle-class families and working families. How to make sure that you can educate your children, how to make sure you have access to affordable health care, and how to make sure you have a dignified retirement. To that end, I've worked very hard to oppose all repeals of Obamacare. We cannot go back to the days when private health insurance companies could deny coverage to those with pre-existing conditions. I also oppose the president's tax law, which in my opinion ran up the debt of the country, concentrated the benefits of the tax law in the hands of the few, and hurt middle-class families by capping state and local tax deductions. To that end, I'm proud that working with others in the House, we've repealed that cap and we're sending it to the Senate for its consideration. I also believe that Medicare and Social Security must be there for current and future generations, and therefore I oppose the president's proposed cuts to those programs. But I'm also somebody who's trying to work with people on the other side of the aisle. And to that end, I'm proud to have authored the landmark legislation and the current law which modernizes our nation's skills-based and vocational education systems. We must make sure that everyone, not only those who get a 4-year college education, can have a path into the middle class. I'm also proud to lead the fight in Congress against the youth vaping epidemic. We've made a lot of strides, but we have a lot of work to do. Finally, even as we disagree, I believe that we can do it without being disagreeable. And so we need civility in our politics, and that's what I'm also striving for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Olson, your opening statement, please.
Good morning, neighbors. On September 8, 1962, township residents approved an historic referendum to curate this library by a vote of 430 to 69. Nearly 60 years removed from this history, I submit the political ethos of those who voted against establishing a government for cultural exchange have been re-expressed nationally and locally as an ignorant authoritarianism. For 3 years, millions of Americans have legitimized a craven despot wrought by elections of dubious expression. My opponent was also elected for the first time in 2016, an election which causes historians to quiver, decent persons to blush, and a candidate for the 8th Congressional Congress to celebrate. My opponent repeats honorable rights of title to a dim conceit of presidency. He authors feckless bills in hopes a dim conceit will sign them into law. And he appears at public fora for purposes of propagandizing and legitimizing fraudulent governance. The congressional record shows one bill Mr. Krishnamurthy has authored, which became a public law. It renamed a post office in honor of American veterans. Yet by an odiously underdeveloped ethics, treating of constituency, he takes money from America's largest manufacturers of war materials and has voted to appropriate trillions to an unauditable bureaucracy. Friends and neighbors, our political circumstances are severe. Persons in an office of president have thieved Commonwealth, spoiled the judiciary, condoned the assassination of a journalist, and compounded the incarceration of children. Meanwhile, an incumbent from Illinois sanctimoniously preaches a gospel of bipartisanship. My name is William Olson. I'm a candidate for the United States Congress, and by no banality of bipartisanship will I ever bow to an opposition as depraved and undeserving of trust as it is semi-literate of law. Thank you all for participating today. It is a conversation I submit we desperately need to have.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain, your opening statement, please.
Good morning. My name is Inam Hussain. I'm professionally a physician. Passionately, I'm an activist. I live the dream of America. I came as a 20 years old boy. I have acquired the studies and developed my family, and now I'm standing in front of you. I have provided the services to this community. I was the president and chairman of anesthesia department in Elgin. My passion is activism. I want to bring the required changes. I am standing for human rights here and human rights abroad. Human rights here means healthcare, education, climate change, and humane immigration policy, because I am an immigrant. And this America has provided the opportunity for all, and I want to provide that opportunity to our neighbors. Thank you. And I would like to say that we are here to bring the other community in the play of democracy. We are representing many of the people who are standing on the sideline. Now this is the time for America that we are part of this community, which is called democracy. I am standing in front of you that I will bring the change because the community is asking for the change which Raja tried to provide 4 years ago and has failed. He has been ascending his position for higher goal. My role is to the community, is to serve the community. I will be providing, as I have provided throughout the world, the healthcare, and my mission is to decrease the disparity in healthcare, and healthcare for all, education for all, and understanding the climate change and warming is the real thing. Thank you very much, and I hope to continue on that on the final statement.
Now let's move on to, I'd ask the audience, please not respond to the candidates. Thank you. Now let's move on to questions. Audience members, if you would like to have the candidates address your question, please write them on an index card and pass them to one of our volunteers. I'll start with a few questions of my own. Remember, candidates, you have 1 minute to answer each question. And the first question is, according to a recent Gallup poll, 35% of all Americans cite candidates' position on healthcare as extremely important. The topic of healthcare is a multifaceted discussion of rising costs, measures for quality in delivery, and equitable access for all citizens. What priorities do you have in addressing this topic, and where will you seek common ground with those on the other side of the aisle to make progress? Mr. Olson, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Since 1902, Americans have invested their labor in the National Institutes of Health. Yet the fruits of those investments have been enjoyed by drug manufacturers, health conglomerates, and exclusive medical practices such as podiatry, dermatology, and plastic surgery. Yet millions of Americans do not have sufficient primary health care. The Medicare for All bill is an imperfect but noble bill. Some benefits would not be covered for 4 years after its passage, yet it removes a pernicious motive for profit at points of delivery where patients interface with caregivers and insurance companies. It takes a leap of faith that our government can support universal health care at a lower net cost. Yet other nations have done it with exemplar effects, and it is a bill I would support.
Thank you. Mr. Hussein, 1 minute, please.
It is a shame that we have twice as our resources being utilized for healthcare as other part of the world. And we are not able to cover about 20 million people. Of course, we have made some stride. Affordable Care Act has included 20 million, but we left the big pharma open, where one tablet which costs $1, they are charging us $20. Just 2 days ago, I was in the pharmacy and tried to get the antibiotics, 4 pills. I did not have my healthcare card, and they were asking me $60. But when my wife came in and provided the card, it was only $6. That disparity has to be stopped. I know I work as a healthcare provider. Where is the wastage? Where is the greed? I can refer to that when I will represent you. So Medicare for all is the solution for all of us.
Thank you. Can you make sure that your microphone is on, Mr. Hussein? I'm not sure that it is. There's a button, I believe. If someone could. Is it on? Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Okay, thank you very much.
So that's why I have to speak loud.
I wasn't sure. Thank you. All right, we'll continue. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Thank you. My wife is here. She's an anesthesiologist. The joke is that we both put people to sleep. So please have a little caffeine. I think that healthcare is a right. It's not a privilege. I believe in universal health coverage. Obamacare made great strides, covering 20 million people, but it's constantly under attack. And so what I've tried to do in Congress at every turn is to oppose the repeal and any encroachments on Obamacare, but also to strengthen it. But we need to do more. First, I'm an original co-sponsor of the public option that we desperately need on all the Obamacare exchanges. One, it allows for people to have access to affordable coverage, and then 2, it will provide competition to private health insurance companies, driving down overall costs. Secondly, I'm also an original co-sponsor of legislation that would allow for early buy-in to Medicare for people between the ages of 50 and 64. They are particularly vulnerable to economic dislocations.
Thank you. Next question. With the federal deficit at an all-time high and growing rapidly, what are your thoughts on the current budget deficit, and how would you approach both the taxing and spending side of the equation to even the balance while funding programs that address our national and global interests? Mr. Hussein, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think we have a disparity in the tax code. We have to raise our top 1%, have to pay the fair share for the taxes. And that will bring the revenue which we require to support our spending. Of course, we have to utilize our dollars to the proper way. We have to make sure we are not outspending like unnecessary war. $1.8 trillion have cost us, and that $1.8 trillion for the last 20 years would have really supported all of our programs. Healthcare, education, and human immigration policy can be dealt with that. So I support that we have to bring our troops back and utilize that tax dollars as well as raising to the top 1% to pay the fair share of taxes. It is overburdened to the middle class like you and me.
Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Well, I think that our debt and deficits are partly out of control because of the recent tax law that was passed in 2017. It is causing a $1 trillion deficit in this year alone. Therefore, important parts of that particular tax code and tax law have to be revised. For instance, many corporations are paying zero in taxes this year, including Amazon. I think just as we pay an Amazon Prime fee every year, they should pay taxes. In addition to that, we have to control our spending. One of the things is we have to pass H.R. 3. That allows for the federal government and Medicare to finally negotiate the price of prescription drugs. This is vital because we are going to be bankrupted through skyrocketing prescription drug prices. Finally, we also have to control spending on other programs, for instance, on defense spending. Routinely, we allocate more than what even the generals and the Defense Department requests for defense spending. That's wrong.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
Our deficit has become expensive. To finance the interest on it is a suffocating expense that Americans presently bear and will continue to bear for generations to come. Yet I find it curious that we appropriate billions upon billions to an unaccountable war machine from the Department of Defense. Today, we've manufactured in excess of war materials, such that we sell fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. Contemplate for a moment what harm might come of this. We talk about spending priorities, but there are billions of dollars in a defense budget which are classified, meaning no one here will know for what uses those are. My opponent voted in December of last year to appropriate $750 billion to an unaccountable Department of Defense. It is a shameless vote, and it is a stain upon your record.
Thank you. Next question. What experience do you bring to this office that sets you apart? We'll start with Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Well, I've had the honor of having on-the-job experience for the last 3 years as your member of Congress. Before that, I was a small businessman. We ran a small company that makes and sells infrared night vision technology. And before that, I helped to start the anti-corruption unit for the Illinois Attorney General's office. Business was very good. This was during the Blagojevich years, and during that time, I learned how not to run a government. And so today, I bring that experience to bear on my current request for your support in the upcoming election. Importantly, even as I've tried to do everything to hold the president accountable and the Trump administration accountable through the impeachment inquiry, in which I was a central player, I've also tried to work with the other side. We've passed 16 pieces of legislation through this recent Congress that were all bipartisan, 8 of which got actually signed into law.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
The question was what experience I have?
The question, I'm sorry. Yes, hold on.
Well, that's enough.
What experience do you bring to this office that sets you apart?
I'm over 25, and I've lived in the state of Illinois for over 7 years. I am therefore qualified to stand for the United States Congress. Experience is unnecessary in the United States Congress, as evidenced by the myriad numbers who bloviate from it and write feckless bills. But ideas are necessary. I have authored a bill to halt the manufacture of domestic firearms. I've authored a bill to provision citizenship to those in the United States. And I've authored an amendment to amend the Constitution for equal rights for women. The Equal Rights Amendment deadline expired not too long ago. I think it's time we push through the states an amendment which recognizes a most sublime right of persons here. The equal right for all persons irrespective of sex.
Thank you. Mr. Hussein.
Well, my life story is the dream of America. I will bring that experience and share that hard work and struggle and being where I am. I came as a 20 years old boy, developed myself, developed my family, and I have provided the resources. I have been the leaders of many of the organizations of the healthcare. I will bring that experience because our healthcare is in shambles, which we have to make it good and provide the services for all people. It is not for the Cadillac program for few, which my opponent try to protect. We have to have a Medicare for all is the solution for this part of the country.
Thank you. Now,
May I have a rebuttal?
yes, you may. This will be your first rebuttal.
Mr. Krishnamurthy, I impeach you. I impeach you for your woeful inadequacy as a lawmaker. I impeach you for abetting a murderous military mentality. And I impeach you for your dim conceit of constituency. You speak vaingloriously about your commitment to public service and the feckless legislation you author, yet for 3 years you sat on a government oversight committee and on your hands, while in office of a president flouted law, appointed children to serve in it, and threatened nuclear war.
Thank you.
In short, Mr.
You've reached the
Krishnamurthy,
end of your time,
you
Mr.
haven't the right
Olson.
stuff.
Mr. Olson, thank you. Yes, you may.
I really don't think that we should Trumpify this debate. I don't think that we should talk to each other in such uncivil manners.
Thank you.
We have to be careful that the dialogue that comes from the White House doesn't infect our general conversation about the issues. And that's why it's so important today that we talk to each other with respect, and that we also agree that we are all trying to do the right thing for our country. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd ask the audience not to respond. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next question, we've got some questions from the audience. First, what will you do to resolve the lack of affordable housing? Mr. Olson, we're starting with you.
Well, we have vouchers, we have Section 8 vouchers, and we have programs that we can administer through our tax code, which encourages the development of housing. It is, I submit, the sine qua non of democratic life that persons have a place to live. We have issues in Elgin, I learned at a candidates forum, neither of my opponents attended, that they have a homeless problem which manifests at its library. It is a shame that we torch trillions of dollars on an unaccountable defense industry, yet there are persons in the 8th Congressional District who are without homes. I would support federal legislation to increase low-income housing and to provide vouchers for those who are in need of them.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain.
Definitely, this is the problem which our district facing. Realizing how the senior citizens are treated. We have reduced their benefit in Medicare. They have to make the difference between providing themselves for the grocery versus their pharmaceutical. Because I know by first experience, not too long ago, I was subsidizing one of my relatives, my wife's grandma. She worked very hard. 50 to 60 years, they pay the price, and then their reduction, they have to make the choice between their pharmaceutical or the grocery. And then on top of that, they have to make the living. Their kids are not supporting them. We have to provide, to benefit for their housing. We have to subsidize the housing for all. The senior citizen, make it affordable so they have the last days of life respectfully because they provided the economy a great deal. Thank you very much.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to repeat the question. What will you do to resolve the lack of affordable housing? Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Thank you. I think that this is becoming an increasing crisis throughout our metropolitan areas. And what it's doing is two things. One is the people who work in those areas are not able to live there. And then secondly, and very importantly, children are increasingly getting segregated into areas along with their parents that are low in resources relative to others. And so it basically continues a pattern of poverty and impoverished school systems, which we can't have in this country if we really seek to have upward mobility for everyone. To that end, I think that we in the government have to do more to undo some of the restrictive zoning ordinances that, for instance, prevent multiple family properties from existing in more places so that we have a greater supply of housing to drive down cost. In addition, we should do whatever we can to prevent gentrification.
Thank you. Next question. What steps would you take to increase access to early learning opportunities like childcare, preschool, and Head Start? Mr. Hussein, we're starting with you.
We are the nation now where single mom are paying the price. We have to support them early childhood so the kids can be schooled and the mothers can be able to provide themselves education, which will empower them to provide the better resources for their kids as well as for them. It is incumbent on us that we have to provide that support to our ladies and especially young ones. Education will be the agenda which we will discuss in the coming question, I hope.
Thank you. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
I think we need universal pre-K. I think this is vital. I see a bunch of people who have an interest in this wearing red shirts in the back. And my office has done whatever we can through legislation to make that a reality. In Illinois, the governor is trying to pursue that. And in those places where they do have access to universal pre-K, you see incredible growth in the children. The years 0 to 5 in the life of a child are vital, and we have to make sure that everyone can start on a level playing field. I know that unfortunately Head Start has become politicized in Washington, and I totally reject the politicization of Head Start. That is a program that works. I have repeatedly tried to vote to fund it at the levels it should be funded at. Unfortunately, the current administration disagrees, and I think that's why we have elections. And I hope that people consider that when they go to the polls this November.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
Universal pre-K is essential to a healthy and literate democracy. But to take a slightly larger look at this, Abraham Lincoln signed into law the first federal land grant to fund a system of public colleges. It was a good, but not a revolutionary idea, yet the costs of higher education have become onerously prohibitive to many students. And so we have a system of public subsidy for universities and college, which is financed by all taxpayers, but is affordable only to families of substantive means. I would support requiring tuition-free curricula of higher learning. I think it is a regressive shame that Harvard College, for example, charges tuition. I don't have a plan, but Elizabeth Warren does. She has proposed extending additional Pell Grants. It is a feasible idea, and I would endorse all persons to scrutinize it.
Thank you. Next question. Do you favor a carbon fee or cap and trade, or neither, to reduce carbon emissions? We'll start with Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Thank you. This deals with one of the existential questions of our time, which is how do we combat man-made climate change? I'm proud to have been an original co-sponsor of H.R. 9, which returns us to the Paris Climate Change Accords. This is vital in controlling carbon emissions. In my prior life as a small business person, we did important research in solar technology, and this is also vital, the expansion of clean, renewable energy to combat climate change. To that end, I'm a proud co-founder of the Bipartisan Solar Caucus in Congress, and in this very year, 2019, we passed important legislation that got signed into law to make it more possible for solar to expand by reducing soft costs. With regard to a cap and trade or a carbon fee system, I think that, or a fee system, we definitely have to look at that as an alternative or an additional means of combating climate change.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
There is in our discourse an hysteria about climate, which Mr. Krishnamurthy repeats, where greenhouse emissions meet end-of-days myth-making. I find the arguments uncompelling that a rising average temperature will comprise a loop of feedback, whereby the rate of warming will increase without return and cause a relatively rapid incineration of our planet. Yet pollution, such as carbon emissions and plastics in particular, is a scourge to human habitation. I've authored a bill which gives monetary expression to investments in renewable energies and environmental remediation, described in the Green New Deal resolutions. The bill is a conservative solution to a progressively worsening market conditions, and I hope you'll support it.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain.
Definitely, first of all, we have to recognize that climate change and global warming is a real thing. It is the state of crisis we are ignoring, and the carbon emission with fossil fuel, that has to be limited. Unfortunately, our foreign minister just few months ago have pulled out the Paris Treaty, and up to 2016 we were going in the right direction, but since then we have turned the tide. The Green Deal is the real thing which we have to look into, where it will address not even the fossil fuel carbon negative. We also have to provide the new energy solution, and that will bring the infrastructure, including the new grid system and other renewable energy. So we will have the better
Thank
jobs.
you, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Hussain. Next question. What can be done to persuade the Trump administration to be truthful and timely in sharing coronavirus developments? We'll start with Mr. Olson.
I don't trust our government. Things which a person who purports to be a legitimate president says are inherently deceitful, duplicitous, and undeserving of all of our trust. The idea that persons in this White House, some of whom are unabashedly fascist, will propose any fruitful solutions as it relates to combating disease is, I think, wishful thinking. And I submit that anything good which might come of the actions of this White House and its various departmental secretaries is as much a function of chance and accident as it is rational planning.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What can be done to persuade the Trump administration to be truthful and timely in sharing coronavirus developments?
First of all, it is unfortunate that the aura of distress between the government and the public. We cannot believe what comes out of the White House, and the reality is opposite to what it is. Coronavirus is reaching to the pandemic level, and we have to address it. They have reduced the resources for CDC, which is the agency which is responsible for tackling this problem. And if you have limited resources, how we can tackle the pandemic? So first, we have to force the government that we have to increase the resources for CDC so they can address this issue, and it will be very drastic if we will not act it in a timely manner.
Thank you. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
I can't believe the president actually called the coronavirus a hoax. We can either live in the world of truth and facts, or we can live in the world of propaganda. If you live in the world of propaganda, you silence critics, you elevate political loyalists, and you have China. In China, they have, according to reported estimates, the public reports, 80,000 cases and thousands of deaths. I believe it's much more than that. I think that in Congress, we're gonna have to hold the administration's feet to the fire on this one because the consequences are too grave otherwise. And so we are going to have to allocate the sufficient resources to deal with it right now. And we cannot allow this administration to take us down into the world of propaganda and allow this to become a pandemic on an even greater scale than it is today.
Thank you. Next question. What would you do to change the Remain in Mexico migration protocol policy that makes families wait in Mexico in deplorable conditions? What would you do to remedy this issue? We'll start with Mr. Hussein.
It's a shame that we are the nation who welcome immigrant. We are a nation of immigrant. A majority of us, whether our grandfathers or forefathers, in fact, my wife's great-great-grandparents came on the Mayflower, and I came myself as an immigrant. It is a shame that we don't have the human policy. We are splitting the families. We are putting them into cage. We have to provide better resources, and above all, we have to make DACA people in front of that, and this way we can make a comprehensive immigration policy from the start of where it starts. So it is a time that Congress will look into seriously how to bring about comprehensive immigration policy, which is humane.
Thank you. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Well, my father's here, and I came here as immigrants. And so for a country to allow an immigrant to become a congressman, it reveals the greatness of the country. And we have strayed from that principle to a point where we push aside immigrants, we push away foreigners, and we also prevent people who have the lawful right to file an asylum claim. We send them back to Mexico. I believe the Remain in Mexico policy, they call it the Migrant Protection Protocol, is illegal. It's illegal. And a court yesterday found that to be the case, and they put a temporary injunction. We cannot allow this policy to continue. People who are seeking asylum and protection in this country should not be sent to unsafe places from which they came to file for asylum. It's illegal, it's wrong, it's un-American.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
In the past 3 years, Americans without citizenship have had their rights torched. Persons have lost incomes, homes, and families on account of a derelict Congress and a vulgar office of a president. 230 years ago, the Congress passed an act to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. White men who had been in the U.S. for 2 or more years could make application at any common court of record and would thereupon be considered citizens of the United States, as would their children. Yet in December, members of a Congress, including Mr. Krishnamurthy, voted to appropriate billions to militarize a border and incarcerate families. I submit border security is a euphemism for barbarism, and comprehensive immigration reform is a euphemism for zealous nationalism. I have authored a bill to reestablish a uniform rule of naturalization. It is time to exalt amnesty for its fairness, its munificence, and its republicanism, and to recodify it into law.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Next question. Name 2 specific bills that are currently before Congress that you feel are very important and why you would support or do not support these bills. We'll start with Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Well, there's my bill, the College Transparency Act. The College Transparency Act is a game changer. Basically what it does is it finally removes the prohibition from the federal government publishing student outcome data by major in college, which the for-profit industry put in place to prevent people from knowing what they were getting when they bought college. This is a bipartisan measure. It has over 200 co-sponsors in the House and more than 30 in the Senate. I'm leading the charge. If we can get this passed, and I'm very hopeful that we can finally allow parents and students to shop for college. and have a return on investment discussion when they talk about which college they're planning to go to. So this is very important. A second piece of legislation I want to see passed is H.R. 8, universal background checks on the purchase of guns. This is absolutely vital to make sure that we keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
Let me take one. The Equal Rights Amendment is before the Congress. In 1920, the 19th Amendment enfranchised women with suffrage, yet it did nothing to redress women's rights at hearing property, due process, or privacy. So shortly thereafter, Alice Paul authored the Equal Rights Amendment. It took 97 years for Virginia to become, last month, the 38th state to ratify it. Yet the Congress, in a slothful act of bipartisanship, had given the states only 7 years for its ratification. Justice Ginsburg recently suggested the expiration had passed and said she would, quote, like it to start over. I'd also like it to start over. I've authored a very similar amendment, but I've allowed only 1 year for its adoption. If the states cannot ratify an amendment as sublimely just as to guarantee equal rights to persons irrespective of sex, I submit this Constitution is not worth the paper it is written upon.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain.
I support the Equal Right Amendment. Secondly, the Social Security Act of which will preserve and also will require the solvency of Social Security. It is important that we cannot keep on putting our fingers in the cookie jar and reaching out to the Social Security, where our senior citizens have already paid price by giving the Social Security taxes. It is not a charity we are giving to them. So those are the two areas which I will support.
Thank you. We'll have one final question before we move on to closing statements. The last question is, if you could remove or reverse a single piece of legislation, what would it be and why? And we'll start with Mr. Olson.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have an answer for it. Many of our laws are odiously compromised. You can see it in the archaeology of some of the very first laws the Congress passed. And we're in a situation now where no matter the nobility of the law or the cogency of its language, we have a person who purports to be a president who has been entrusted to faithfully execute the laws, yet he doesn't know them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain.
Well, I go back to healthcare again. We have definitely we worked on Affordable Care Act, but we failed to put a lid on the pharmaceutical, the greed of the instrument providers. Just imagine, just a few years back, if you know, we have Attorney General named Ashcroft. He was hired by one of the scientific company which provide the processes for the knee joints and others. And he was hired for $60 million a year. What he is protecting, either he is protecting you or protecting the big industry. So we have to look into that how we can provide the healthcare better than what we have right now. So that's the area which I will work on.
Thank you. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Well, I wish that the 2017 tax law was never passed and signed into law. It's a horrible piece of legislation, one of the worst that we've ever passed. 83% of the benefits go to the top 1% of income holders. That is wrong. That's unfair. In addition, it drives up the deficits and debt for as far as the eye can see, passing on mountains of debt onto future generations. And on top of all of that, it's just a piece of legislation that's going to continue to lead to the outsourcing of jobs and economic activity, because it goes to what's called a territorial system of taxation, meaning companies get taxed not at the rates that we are assessed here in the United States, but at the rates in the jurisdictions where they are earning the taxes. Well, guess what? They're going to move more of the economic activities of their companies abroad where the taxes are lower. That's not right.
Thank you.
I have a rebuttal.
You have a rebuttal?
Mr. Hussein, you may go first.
My question is for our congressman. What he was doing in Congress in order to address the issue
Actually,
of
Mr.
taxation?
Hussein, you cannot address the panel. You need to address the audience. You're welcome to make remarks to the audience. You have 30 seconds if you'd like to take it.
I'm just wondering about the Congress, what their role was in order to provide that new tax law. What they were, their duties to provide the top 1% and receiving the resources from them, like Boeing and big company, and funding their own campaign. So that is my question to you.
Mr. Olson, was there a remark you'd like to make in rebuttal? This
Ye-
is your last and final
Yes,
one.
there is. With respect to existing laws, days after Mr. Krishnamurthy voted for more war in a defense authorization, he voted to extend barbarism under the guise of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which lavished $12.8 billion to U.S. Customs and Border Protection and $4.4 billion to Immigration and Customs Enforcement for purposes of, quote, enforcement, detention, and removal operations, including unaccompanied minor children. You read these bills? The paramilitary political complex is
Thank
like a
you.
racket, and I submit Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Krishnamurthy
Wilson.
is an altogether dim and willing
Mr.
participant
Wilson.
to its barbaric extensions.
Thank you.
May I respond?
You may. This is your last and final.
Well, I reject what Mr. Olson said. It's completely an inaccurate mischaracterization of my record. With regard to the tax law, I fought it tooth and nail. We didn't have the votes, and that's why elections matter. And so I just respectfully request everyone here to please vote, and to encourage everyone else to vote. If you believe that any of these issues matter to you and your families, we need you to have a voice at the table, because in Washington, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Thank you. And with that, time now requires that we move on to closing statements. Candidates, you will have 1 minute each, and we will begin with Mr. Hussein.
2 minutes for closing?
No.
1 minute for closing.
I'm asking the citizen of my district, are you better off 4 years ago or now? Is this economy which is make believe that it is very good by the media and our own Congress, which is just last week, within 3 days, our resources for our the retirement funds is put away by coronavirus. The economy went down. We lost almost 1,500 points, and now our retirement, our security investment being wasted. So are we really strong 4 years ago or now? If you are not, so please vote on March 17th. It is time for change. It is time that I will take your voices on the human rights here and human rights abroad.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Thank you again. Thank you again to the League for hosting today's event. Thank you to all of you for coming and being an engaged citizenry. When I ran for office, and even today, I do everything I can to work with people on the other side of the aisle to pass bills and get them signed into law to help grow and strengthen the middle class. At the same time, I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. I didn't go to Congress to impeach anyone, let alone the president. However, we were forced to do so because of his actions. Nobody is above the law, not even the President of the United States. And I will continue to hold this administration accountable for their actions. I respectfully request your vote in the upcoming election. I respectfully request a contract extension for another 2 years. I think I've done a good job, but I need your help to get another 2 years to continue our work for the middle class and working families of this country.
Thank you. Mr. Olson.
The U.S. Senate exercised its power and gave its consent in January of 2017 to the appointment of Jefferson B. Sessions III as United States Attorney General. And within weeks, persons acting between U.S. ports of entry had rights of guardianship coerced from them. Within months, a heinous crime committed in the cold hand of a government forcibly separated families, which I submit is the most pernicious part of slavery and harkens an archaeology of genocide. The consequences of a derelict Congress, which fails to redress mass kidnapping, includes a bigot from Alabama who pollutes public discourse. Jefferson Sessions is a candidate for the 117th United States Congress, and so am I. Our country needs your support, and I'm asking for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as we bring our forum to a close, I'd like to thank the candidates for their participation this morning. Would you join me, please? The candidates will be available to you after the forum. Out of respect to library patrons, they've asked that we stay here in this room. So as soon as the forum is complete, you may speak to the candidates in this room. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I thank you for coming today. Don't forget, early voting starts on March 2nd. The primary election takes place on March 17th. Please participate in our democracy by casting your ballot. Thank you.